listening to 103.5 FM WNHH New Haven.
Good morning and welcome to WNHH FM's Dateline, New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Dwight Merriam has been making our state tick for 4 decades and longer as an attorney at the forefront of 2 word pairs that may seem dry and distant, but in fact drive much of what we argue about every day in New Haven. Here's the first word pair: land use. That gets to everything we've been arguing about on the show all week. The second word pair is water efficiency. It is at the center of important policy discussions like President Trump's so-called war on toilets. Attorney Merriam is here in the WNHH studio to help us parse all that. Thanks for coming in, Dwight.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Paul. Good to see you again after many, many years.
Yes, great here too, and thanks to New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So, Dwight, you are the president of the Rivers Alliance of Connecticut.
Yes, I am.
Past president of the American Institute of Certified Planners. You're a practicing lawyer. And so while President Trump has declared a war on LED lights, a war on windmills, he also has a war on toilets. And those titles you have, Dwight, have put you at the forefront of this. What's this all about?
Well,
what's he upset with toilets, and why are you upset with him for being upset?
Well, I think he's playing to his base at this point, looking forward to the campaign ahead. Because when he first became president, he called in all the leaders of business into the White House and asked them what regulations they'd like to get rid of.
And they had a whole bunch of coal regulations,
right, but not
emissions from cars.
But not this, not water efficiency, so not wind power, and not LEDs. And the president kept pushing, saying, don't you want to get rid of these? And they said no. So now he's pulled this out of his hat. And as I said, I declared his war on toilets. What he's saying is that these low-flow devices don't work. He said... and we've got a transcript from the White House. They actually transcribe everything he says. It's unbelievable. WhiteHouse.gov.
I wonder if they hire kind of satirists to do it so they can enjoy it to get through the day.
You look at it, you say, he can't possibly have said this, but indeed he did. And he talked about he has to flush 10 or 15 times. And every time I've written about that, I've got back all kinds of comments that we're not going to repeat on the air. But
let's tell people what we're talking about. That years ago, there was a new standard for efficiency of not just toilets, but also some better fixes like showers.
Right.
And because of the 1992 Energy Policy Act set standards by Congress, so that every time we flush a toilet, every time we turn the shower, the idea is to get all the water we need, but not waste a whole lot of extra water. Is that a good way to put it?
That is a good way to put it. And let me just say, this is not just about saving water, because here we're lucky in the Northeast. We have generally lots of water. Some of our 44 watersheds in the state of Connecticut are a little short on water, and we need to be careful. We need to conserve water, especially potable water. We're really worried about this PFAS problem, PFAS, which is a contaminant that has got into the water from firefighting foam, and it causes everything from liver damage to obesity in very small amounts.
So I wonder if in California, especially, that must be
well, and so it's not just a matter of quantity, but it's rather a matter of quality. So we waste a lot of water.
I understand why in much of the world, especially with climate change, but even before, it's really a bad idea to waste water because you're not going to have enough, right? And they have those problems in California with climate change. I think the predictions, right or wrong, is that in fact we're going to have more water in the Northeast than the rest of the areas going to have less, but I don't know if that's correct.
Well, here's the real issue, and is it going to be the high quality water that we need for drinking and cooking and bathing? And this is really an economic issue. We don't, frankly, Paul, we don't see people doing enough water conservation in the state of Connecticut, and in the Northeast generally. And it's a matter of economics. It's not just about saving water. Let me just tell you one little analysis I did, and if our listeners will go, just use their search engine and go to EPA Water Sense, WATERSENSE. They'll see the whole federal EPA program, and you can learn a lot there. And what you learn about water conservation is it's not just about saving gallons of water, but when you heat up that water for your shower or shaving or washing, doing your laundry, doing your dishwasher, you're using a lot of electricity or a lot of natural gas or propane to heat that water. And then what happens on the other end? It goes into our sewage treatment system. And so if we decrease our use of water on the front end, we save a lot on electricity. And our electric rates are among the highest in the nation.
And it
here
pollutes.
in
The more
Connecticut.
electric energy we use, the more pollution, the less
Right.
we're using not renewable sources. And isn't it more serious also in other parts of the world where it has to do with like people don't have enough water to drink or to do, water their crops or even to safely bathe or eat or drink, right?
Well, of course, and we're fortunate here to have that. But
Because Bob's a listener, Dwight. He says, "Is it okay to flush? Is the water safe? And what does Dwight think of bottled water?"
I don't like bottled water.
Me either. I'm with Ralph Nader. I think it's a sick corporate conspiracy to get you pay money for things you don't need because
First of
it's
all-
safe water here
First of all, the bottled water
isn't better.
isn't better. In many cases, when it's tested, it's not as good as our tap water here in Connecticut. We've got good water companies that provide us with high quality water, but all of us ought to be concerned about the plastics side of that.
Right.
And
Ralph
the energy
Nader talked
cost of,
about it was something invented to go against the public good, which is to have communal water so that companies can make money off it. Although in Flint, you need it, right? Like in crisis, you need it.
well, we need our water companies. Our water companies do a great job for us here in Connecticut.
Yeah.
But we as consumers need to do our part in this. Here's a little thing I did, Paul. If you go to the WaterSense site, EPA, you can do this for your own house. And say if you were to convert your pre-1980 toilet to a water-saving toilet and your shower and your sink aerators to these energy-conserving devices, here's what you'd save. A family of 4 using electric hot water heater by replacing the toilet and the sink fixtures and a shower head would save 32,000 gallons of water a year, equivalent of 780 loads of laundry, 580 kilowatt hours. Look at your electric bill. They're horrible here in Connecticut. Save 870 pounds of greenhouse gas. Bottom line, $330 in utility bill savings alone. So it's not just about saving so many gallons of water. 32,000 gallons of water is a lot, but it's also all the energy costs that comes with handling that water.
Well, you talked about President Trump going to his base. So he got corporate leaders who convinced him to get rid of all sorts of regulations, but not one mentioned windmills, not one mentioned LED lights, not one mentioned the toilets. But you talked about his base. I'm thinking this started long before President Trump. I remember Rush Limbaugh was talking about this 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when people were saying, he's saying these toilets, you have to flush them so many times and they don't even work. So all these like hippies and greenies and Al Gore types, he's kind of lumped them together, want you to do stuff that we don't need to do for our environment. You're making the case just now that not just saves us money to do this, but it saves the planet. But they do have a point that you have to flush more sometimes, especially the early versions. So obviously technology is advancing us. We don't have to use as much water in our shower because you have devices that don't waste as much water in the process. You usually don't need to flush all the water we used to flush when you use the toilet, especially for number one, because they can design them better. But there were still some blips along the way that sort of the pro-corporate right seized on, or the anti-regulation right seized on, to get the average person upset. When President Trump says, I have to flush my toilet 15 times, we all say it's ridiculous. But people in their everyday life know, if they're older, which is also part of his base, that there are times we used to flush the toilet once where we now flush it 3 times.
Well,
overall, we're using less water. Overall, we're saving money. But isn't that what he's responding to?
well, what the situation is here is the early low flow devices were not anywhere near as good as they are today.
Right, 92
They're
is
wonderful
different
today,
from
and now we have
2019.
we have these two-stage devices for back to toilets again.
Yeah.
Your family could save 13,000 gallons of water a year and $130 in water costs by replacing just their old inefficient toilets. But it's the same thing I experienced with LED. I was an early adopter of LED bulbs, and they came from China. They didn't work well. They failed. I was an early adopter of solar. My house in Vermont was solar 15 years ago. I had to create a private utility company in order to do solar on that house.
You had to create a utility company.
You had to actually create a private utility company.
That just consisted of Dwight Merriam's house.
No, I'm just saying 15 years ago. And then I just did my house here in Simsbury a couple of years ago, and it was so much cheaper. Everything works better. So, Paul, what you're talking about is that the early fixtures that we had 20 plus years ago were not anywhere near as good as they are today. And the whole industry has adopted this. You know, what's going to happen here is that nobody's going to go back to the old toilets and the old shower heads and the like, because it's now the industry standard and people want it. And the same goes with LEDs. The president can talk all he wants about bringing back incandescent bulbs, but the fact is that people have voted with their pocketbooks. They like LEDs, they like the CFLs, the compact fluorescent light fixtures, and that's what they're buying.
And they cost less, and they last long, and they don't destroy the environment.
I think incandescent bulbs are cases, like 8% these days.
Isn't this also the way we talk about gay rights? Isn't this the way we talk about the country's demographics changing? That inevitably history changes and it brings change. And that change is hardest or most uncomfortable for older people living a certain way. And that in the short term, there's a reaction against it. So, you know, we moved ahead and legalized gay marriage, and there's a backlash in some states for a while and a rise in hate. Similarly with the environment, we know we have to change what we're doing. I mean, business recognizes we have to change what we're doing because of climate change. But that in the short term, a demagogue can run for office and talk to the older folks. Hey, remember when those liberals didn't make you flush your toilet so many times? Remember when they didn't make you these fancy bowls? What was wrong with the old way? But isn't that a real barrier, a real political barrier to tackling modern challenges?
Oh, I think we do have, you know, inertia has two forces. It's the inertia of movement. You can't stop something that's big and heavy, but there's also the inertia of rest, and that's what you're talking about. Something that's big and heavy sitting there, it's hard to move. It's hard to move people that are used to the old ways.
And yet, as you pointed out, as with other issues, when it comes to LED lights, when it comes to more water-efficient devices, when it comes to green energy, the whole world pretty much on one level is on board, right? I mean, companies are doing it. The markets are responding to it. But that politics is sort of our last bastion because you can win office appealing to grievances of people who feel left behind or worried about change.
Well, I'm sure that's the case. Here, again, it's really one of economics, and our citizens here in Connecticut are indeed, as I said earlier, voting with their pocketbooks and their wallets to use energy-efficient light fixtures like LEDs and CFLs. And they are adopting solar and other green energy and wind power as a result. And they certainly are embracing, for the most part, water-conserving devices. But I think what they're missing, because we do not see as much effort to use water-conserving devices as we think we should, because the people just do not understand the tremendous economic benefits. And the number one issue, I think, in water conservation, believe it or not, here in Connecticut, I'm going to ask you this question, Paul. How many times have you driven down the street during a rainstorm and looked at somebody's sprinklers sprinkling the lawn?
Ooh. You see, I don't see it much where I live.
Well,
I say I barely drive, and there aren't a lot of sprinklers where I live.
Well,
but yeah,
we'll get you out of town once in a while.
What's it like in the burbs? People do that in the rain?
It's like that in the city, even where you have a company that's got a irrigation system.
Well, to me, the analog, Dwight, is going by Urban Outfitters. All the chain stores on Broadway, on a burning hot day, their doors are wide open, and the air condition is blasting onto Broadway.
Well, you remember Nixon used to have a fire in the fireplace during the summer.
And Bob McCormick asked you, do you like self-flushing? What do you think of self-flushing
But
toilets?
no, but here's my point about irrigation. I want to make sure our listeners understand what's available to them. I built a house 18 years ago, and it was state-of-the-art then, and it has an irrigation system in it. And the controller was the standard controller that we have here in Connecticut. In other words, it turned the water on at 4 in the morning and ran it for a half hour. every couple of days to irrigate the lawn. Fine. But now I got a notice from the water company last summer. It says, you must have a leak in your system. Your bill is $200 and something for the summer.
Wow.
I said, well, I don't have a leak in the system. Well, the problem was that the controller was just watering the lawn when it didn't need to. So guess what you can get today?
Weather connected to the weather?
No, exactly. You're ahead of me on that, Paul. So most people don't know that.
I hope it's not connected to my phone, because when my phone tells you that it's raining, it's not, and vice versa.
It's just when you come and go, we're looking at your Nest photos.
No, but what I mean, is it connected to an actual measurement system of how much rain is coming down, or is it to the weather service?
Here's how it works, and I'm encouraging everybody who's got lawn irrigation in Connecticut, if we would just do that, replacing a standard clock timer with a WaterSense labeled irrigation controller can reduce an average home's irrigation water by 15% and save 7,600 gallons. I've reduced mine by 3/4, and here's how it works. I am Wi-Fi connected with a central station nearby. It has weather forecasts, so it knows if it's rained yesterday, and if it did, it's not going to allow the sprinkler to operate today. But beyond that, you ready for this? It's got the forecast for tomorrow. It has the forecast for tomorrow, so it says, look, Dwight, you don't need to irrigate today because it's going to rain tomorrow. So we're not irrigating today because the forecast is for rain. And but
what if the forecast is wrong?
The forecasts are wrong, but your lawn's not going to die. Right? And my lawn looks perfectly good, and I saved 3/4 of my water bill.
I have to be honest with you, Dwight.
Yeah.
I question the need for lawns.
Well, so do I. I mean, as a planner, we spend a lot of time. And when we talk about
I have an artist next door who just has a free lawn with whatever naturally comes out of the flowers, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it comes into my yard and it makes these beautiful flowers.
You're right. Xeriscaping is what we call it. We want to go to low water use. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the NetBlue program.
And I do want to talk about NetBlue. We're talking about that on Dateline New Haven on WNHH, your home for community radio on 103.5 FM, live stream, newhavenindependent.org. We have the man in Connecticut who knows more about water policy and land use, which we're definitely going to get to, folks. This is the guy who wrote the book on affordable housing here. And Bob McCormick had a quick last question here. Do you like self-flushing toilets?
Self-flushing toilets? You know, I wasn't prepared for that question.
You don't have to answer it. All I know that I'm always amazed by it when I'm in a restaurant or something, you know. Anika Singh Lamar says, more parks, fewer lawns. I'm with her, and that's about open space.
I'm there. I'm just telling you, you know, I'm locked in my suburban landscape.
We also talk about the real world where you want to get there. That's the goal. But in the meantime, let's do better with what we got. So tell me about NetBlue. What is NetBlue? It does, and what you're part of that, and what are you looking to do?
Well, our listeners can just use their search engine, their Google, Bing, Yahoo, whatever, and go AWE, Alliance for Water Efficiency, just AWE NetBlue. They do AWE NetBlue, they'll get there. It's an astounding, great program. I was on the National Advisory Board. A half a dozen of us worked for the last 4 or 5 years as advisors to River Network, the Environmental Law Institute in Washington, D.C., and the Alliance for Water Efficiency, headed by my good friend Merriam Dickinson. And we have developed a program which we're rolling out for the first time in Bozeman, Montana, right now.
Interesting location.
Well, because they have a water shortage, and they got some funding for us to implement this program. And basically, in its simplest form, is this: developer comes along, says, "I want to build 20 houses." Say, fine. How much water is 20 houses going to use? X number of gallons. You know, we use 88 gallons per person per day on average. So they tell us how many gallons. And then we tell a developer, go find some water. Not a new water source, but go find some water through water conservation. We want to see the low flow toilets. We want to see the systems for showers and for sinks, but we also want to see rainwater capture, maybe split systems that use non-potable water for lawn watering, and assuming we don't have Paul Bass's Xeriscape landscape of all rocks and stones and cactuses.
We do have a little lawn, but yeah,
and
we don't water it.
But they also will cause developers to go off-site to find offsets in compensation. Go to a 30-year-old condominium project and say, hey, we're going to replace all your toilets for you free in return for using that water savings to meet our NetBlue requirements for our new development. So what we're saying is no new water supplies, No new piping systems, no new treatment systems, but offsetting the water use and with these compensatory measures.
Well, that's interesting. So that's why I wanted to transition here, Dwight. I'm guessing you've spent more time than anyone I know at planning boards, zoning boards, and court cases involving how you build stuff in New Haven. In Connecticut, land use.
My license plate number on one of my cars is zoning, Z-O-N-I-N-G. It's the car I don't take to the controversial hearings because somebody will keep.
But in other words, you've been in the weeds. You just gave us a little taste of this. When someone wants to build condos, wants to build apartments, build a house, and everyone's arguing about how to do it and getting into the details of how to do it. You just gave an example of the kind of question that we really need to pay attention to, which is how much water is it going to use? But of course, we have to pay attention to a lot of things like affordable housing, open space. How big a factor, and I want to talk about those other two, but how big a factor is water in general? You just talked about when we build stuff now in Connecticut, we wanted to have a net zero impact on the water supply. Right. How often is that happening? And from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like you think that in the public approval process, when governments deal with developers either negotiating zoning changes or perhaps permitting, that we can bargain for those kind of results. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. I think even though we have so much water, good water here in Connecticut, that people are really not paying attention to the need to preserve that water. We do need to be conscious of it. We do need to ask the question, is our water basin one of those 44 basins? Does it have adequate water to carry us through a drought? And is the quality of the water good? And as I said early on in our conversation, this PFAS question is frightening.
Now, Senator Blumenthal's taking that up, right?
Well, yes.
You're not impressed. Tell me.
No, I'm just saying.
Come on.
No, I'm just saying. Yes, he is, and I appreciate that. but what I'm telling you is that every time we turn around, we trip over another PFAS problem. In Canton, Connecticut, right near where I live, the firefighters decided that they needed to exercise their firefighting skills with foam, which is an essential for oil fires. What we used to train with in the Navy when I was first commissioned. And so they picked a place that they thought was good out in an open field. It happened to be the field at the elementary school. And they made the foam, and the foam went into the ground, and the ground went into the well, and now they got PFAS in the elementary school's water system.
Oh, no. Where was that?
In Canton. And we're going to keep discovering that. And so we have to be very, very careful to protect the water. Oh, it's terrible. It's just, like I said, it causes liver disease and cancer and all kinds of other problems in minute quantities.
Is that happening here in New Haven? Like, are they using foam unnecessarily in training and in fires that don't involve oil?
Well, there is, no, not for fires involving oil and gasoline. Foam is the only good mechanism, but there is an alternative being developed. It's expensive, and we're going to have to go to it as quickly as we can. But meantime, we have to be very careful about how we use PFAS foam. But that's beside the point. So
I was back to zoning and water. Now, another big issue now, we have a building boom in New Haven.
Yeah.
And we have it in Hamden a little bit. We have it in a bunch of cities in the country, especially universities. People want to move in. We had all these decades where people didn't want to come here. We tried to bribe them with tax breaks. Now they want to come. We don't need to give them tax breaks. We need to ask them to do some stuff we care about if they want to build. Affordable housing, you wrote the book on it, right? It's called Inclusionary Zoning Moves Downtown. You wrote it years ago. And now New Haven, suddenly in the last 4 months, that phrase, inclusionary zoning, has catapulted to the center of public discussion because we're worried about affordable housing. And the conversation is complicated because some people say when people build stuff that's market rate, and again, we're not kicking people out of existing buildings. We're doing a lot of building, 4,000 units coming online, 1,000 just in the last few years did. We're building on vacant land or in vacant buildings. And we're putting market rate apartments, people who can pay high rents. So people say, what about people who can't? So inclusionary zoning has come to mean requiring builders, if they want to build, to include affordable units.
Right.
There are other people who say that will lead to fewer affordable units because if they can't make the finances work on a project, they won't build at all. But if they build just market rate housing, that will take the demand pressure off other housing in town, and therefore rents won't go up there. Other people come back and say, no, you got to require it because people can't afford to live here as much, and that's just theory. But in practice, neighboring landlords will be able to charge more if those rents are higher. I've seen boom and bust cycles, so my DNA, just of memory, says We did this in the 90s, and all that expensive housing became middle class and worker housing because the market investors lost their shirt. And when I look at Winchester Avenue, New Haven, I don't believe apartments are going to continue to rent for $3,000 a month in 5 years, but I could be wrong. Where do you stand as someone who's been in the thick of this and wrote the book for 40 years?
Oh, my goodness.
How should we tackle the affordable housing inclusionary zoning?
My goodness, Paul. We have 3 or 4 hours because...
No, we got 7 seconds. Go ahead. No, we got a few minutes.
I moved to New Haven in 75 to go to law school, and I was here until 1990 or so. And I saw my neighborhood in Westville go up and down. And up and down.
Yeah, and it still is.
On West Rock. Yeah, it goes up and down. It's a great neighborhood.
I'm a block from that. Yeah, it's nice.
And
every street is different. Like where I live, the houses go for about 150 to 250. One block over on Alden, they can go for $500,000.
Yeah, but that market's gone up and down in cycles that seem to be shorter than the rest of the state. Wow, you've touched on a lot of things. Let me parse this as quickly as I can.
No, take a little time.
Well, no, I'm a lawyer. A lawyer says they're going to talk quickly. You won't.
Oh, you're right.
Get out from underneath that for an hour. Here's the thing. The questions you ask is trickle down. Should we just build any kind of housing? The late Paul Davidoff, who was a champion of opening up the suburbs, and a good friend of mine, and my friend Phil Tegler worked with him, who was with the ACLU of Connecticut for years. He was one of the co-editors of that book you mentioned in 1984. Phil Tegler was. And at the end, when Paul was dying and I was with him, he said, I wished I hadn't fought so hard just to open up the suburbs with affordable housing. I wished I had supported all housing, because he believed in trickle down. So there may be a little trickle down.
And that's, trickle down is a loaded word.
I know.
Because it started with the laugher curve, which was laughable.
I know.
That if you just have rich people get richer, they'll spend it more. And that doesn't work.
Well, I'm just saying.
But that doesn't mean it's never true that having an expanding tax base gives the government more money to deal with problems like affordable housing.
When I get to where I want to go and reply to your question, you'll see exactly
how we...
No, I'm not interrupting you. I'm telling you that you can have some trickle down. That's part of it. Number 2 is that new construction affordable housing is not working for us in Connecticut.
Because it costs a lot to build.
Of course it costs a lot to build. And
like people are always saying, why is the housing authority spending hundreds of thousands per unit? And isn't it because it just costs more to build, especially if you're not going to just have illegal labor?
We're not getting anywhere. We got 830G, the Affordable Housing Land Use Appeals statute, that allows override of local zoning. It's been in place for 30 years. We've got 5,000 units out of that. Good.
And it takes years, like in Brantford with the Atlantic
Wire
site.
The Westport fight's gone on for 12 years, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees. I know. I've been a lawyer in those cases.
That's why you got the zoning license plate.
And yeah, on a 2002 Volkswagen. So okay. I didn't do that well. So, but so this new construction, yes, that's part of it. We have to orchestrate techniques, and I think the Affordable Housing Land Use Appeals statute is fine. Could be strengthened, could be expanded. But here's where we have to go, Paul. And I just had a piece in the Hearst newspapers called Resolutions for the New Year or something.
Was that behind the paywall or not? Because I'm wondering whether people read it.
No, I think it's in front of the paywall. It's the Connecticut Post and the Register, and a bunch of others picked it up. It was on January 2nd. If somebody Googles Dwight Merriam Resolutions for the New Year, they'll find it. Here's where we have to go. We have to do this. We have to do what Vermont has done, what California has done, and what Oregon has done this year. And that is tell people that they have a right at the local level. The General Assembly and the governor have to change the law to tell people that they at the local level have the right, as of right, to have at least one additional dwelling unit on their lot.
Are you talking about accessory units?
Accessory dwelling units.
That was just impressed big time. New Haven has a new affordable housing law. I don't know if you saw that in a report. And one of its recommendation is the so-called mother-in-law apartments.
Wow.
That you can build an extra unit. You hate mother-in-law. Okay.
No, I just think that's a terrible term.
I love my mother-in-law. It's not running.
Well,
okay. But in any case,
I do too. So, but
you can build an extra unit more easily on your house as of right. You don't have to hire a lawyer to get permission.
And do you know why this is so powerful? Because I'm getting goosebumps telling you, Paul, people that are watching on the thing, when you're over 70 and you get goosebumps talking about something, it's pretty exciting. And here it is, Minneapolis, which the mayor of Minneapolis and the officials there have acknowledged that they're one of the most segregated cities in the country because of racial covenants of old. And they wanted to bust through that. And Mayor Jacob Fry, I met with him in October, had breakfast with him in Minneapolis to talk about what they're doing. And what they did is they declared that every single family lot in Minneapolis could have 2 additional units as of right. And you know what it's just like? It's just like, believe it or not, Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and VRBO. It's the gig economy. It's the little people doing it. So here's what happens. Here's why we would bust open our affordable housing problem if we allowed accessory dwelling units as of right. Like Vermont does, California does, Oregon does, Minneapolis now, Seattle, and many other cities. And that is, that unit can be created with very little cost because, number one, the land is free. Number two, because the lot's there. If you cut off your second floor of your house and turn it into an apartment, or finish the area over your garage, or put a freestanding unit in the backyard, the land is free. The water, electricity, sewer, it's all free because it's all in the lot. And it's every little mom and pop, just like the Uber drivers and the Airbnb hosts, that are using their capital, millions and millions and millions of them worldwide using their capital to contribute to the economy.
And unlike Uber and the other parts of gig economy, it's not to have a model where you're gradually squeezed for money and have the profits go to some shareholders.
It goes right into your pocket.
Into your plan. Anika Singh Lamar does a lot with this. I don't know if you know her, but she's sort of the new Dwight Merriam in Connecticut.
Yes, I do know her.
Okay.
Let's go, please.
And she writes that Oregon and Minneapolis triplexes are a better model than ADUs.
Well, that's what it is. I don't.
Which can be defined quite restrictively. Tell me about that. It's a little over my head here.
Well, accessory dwelling units are a term used sort of generically for these additional units, but that's correct. These triplexes, in other words, they don't have to be small units. They could be big units. But in a sense, they are all accessory to the primary home.
So what's the difference here? For those of us who aren't experts, what's the two different approaches here to how you let someone add something on their property without hiring Dwight Merriam and having them keep a zoning license plate at home?
The difference between what? Accessory dwelling units?
And this triplex she's talking about.
There really isn't any difference. It's
Well, I think she's talking about how they're defined in the law. So
well, they're defined
restrictive.
in Minneapolis as not restrictive. It doesn't restrict the size of the unit. The accessory dwelling units sometimes are restricted in their size.
So Annika's telling us that if we're going to do this in New Haven, don't limit how big it can be.
You probably should not limit how big it should
now,
be.
How about limiting how small it's right? One big part of the debate, and I see it shifting in New Haven by the week, is micro apartments, tiny houses.
Right.
Big push for tiny houses.
Right.
Where are you on that one?
Oh, I love them. I think they're, and I've spoken on them, written on them, studied them. The tiny house movement and micro apartments are great, but they're not for everybody by a long shot. A 380 square foot.
Now, our
apartment.
mayor who just left, Tony Hart, was against them because she said that that's too small an area for people to live in. We don't want to solve our problems by squeezing grandma in 400 square feet.
If you look, 30 years ago, I started a case that eventually went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Tim Hollister was my associate, took it over and ably argued it in the court above on appeal, and we won in the long run, which outlawed non-occupancy-based minimum floor area. In other words, requiring a big house no matter how many people lived in it. At that time, I looked at what was safe and healthful, and the Center for Disease Control American Public Health Association Housing Code says you need 250 square feet for the first person and 100 square feet for each person thereafter.
That's tiny.
Well, if you traveled in Europe at all, you know what time
That's right. Europe's always been different. And now you see it in New York, right? And you see it at the Corsair, where people pay really high rents to be in these closet-sized apartments, but you're also part of a bigger community that has these big communal spaces.
Well, now you're getting into co-housing.
Yes.
The last week I've been working with some people who want to do some co-housing, which is where you're basically living in a dorm or a fraternity house or sorority house, where you have your bedroom, maybe a little kitchenette with it or something for coffee, but for the most part, you're sharing a kitchen,
I
sharing
think you're
a living
talking
room.
about two things here. Make me sure I'm not wrong about this. When I hear co-housing, I'm thinking about intentional communities creating, like there's one in Bethany.
Yep.
Where
I know the one in
and
Bethany.
often older folks, and generally that's where it's like a dorm. So you intentionally say, we want to eat our meals together.
Right.
So I'll have the little kitchen, a little space. But I'm thinking of a newer phenomenon. I'm thinking of my friend who worked here and moved to New York, and all she could afford was an expensive building where the bedroom was, the whole apartment was less the size than the studio. But it's not co-housing where they all cook their meals together. It's just that there are general spaces there, like a workout room, like a community workspace, like at the Corsair where they have, the pizza oven and the pool. So that's a little more not co-housing where you went in with a bunch of people, but it's the same concept of your private space is smaller, but you're paying for some communal space. But that's more to make the economics work, right?
I think they are different in the concept of not being as socially connected. The latter,
but similar
type
in how you make the money work.
But they've got one in San Francisco now where they have really essentially dorm rooms for people, and they share a kitchen. They may not know their neighbors or care about them. The co-housing, like Bethany and the other ones that we're talking about, the people have an affinity with each other socially.
I like that so
like
much
a big
more.
family.
I'm not into this whole, find ways to squeeze people and call it community while we work, get you all the money they can before the investors come after.
I guess.
All right, but we're talking to Dwight Merriam here about land use, about war on toilets here at WNHH FM. So here's the thing I've been scratching my head about most recently. There's been this reaction to some of the efforts you're talking about where we try to do what you just said to do, get rid of some of the rules so that the mom and pop person can more easily build a little more on her own property without having to hire Dwight Merriam and a zoning license plate to come try to get you the rule, so that you can even create more businesses, make it denser, build closer to the line. In New Haven, the backlash has come from the activists who want more affordable housing and don't want the big developers, and they actually stopped the neighborhood from doing what you said in their commercial district by saying, we don't want you to change the rules to make it easier as of right, which means without hiring a zoning lawyer, to build a denser development, to have more of a mix of uses to come closer to the sidewalk, because we're worried that'll be gentrification. Other people say it's the opposite. Right now, the big builder who wants to come in and gentrify can afford to hire the lawyer to let him or her go beyond what the rules are now, but we want to make it easier for everyday people to go denser. Did they miss an opportunity in New Haven by stopping 3 out of 4 neighborhoods to change its zoning to add as of right ability to build denser and closer to the line and mixed use?
Well, I'm a fan of increasing density in any way that we can to try to capitalize on the existing infrastructure. That's part of a sustainable approach to planning and land development. So we need to densify. We're not dense enough in Connecticut to support a lot of the transportation alternatives.
But we're dense about density.
Well, yeah, there's if people like sustainability, they only just don't like density, and
so this
is
what
inconsistent.
And it said here, if you will definitely start. She writes in. Thanks for listening, by the way, and for weighing in. I feel like it's a generational thing. We have so that what you were doing, what she did, what she does now, so at the forefront. She was in Brantford pushing for the affordable housing at the very low you were part of helping advocate for. She said, writes, you will definitely start to see faux affordable housing, meaning fake affordable housing advocates in places like Westport propose laws like you're talking about, accessible dwelling units that limit square footage and bedroom count to limit the ability to use those units to house families with children.
Yeah.
Even New Hampshire, which sometimes touted a model for you talking about, Dwight, permits local governments to cap bedroom count at 2. Yes, this is in the weeds, but the details are important that the additional units are actually built and habitable by families. So this gets back to, she was saying there was a difference between talking about letting people build triplexes on the property or writing laws that talk about accessible dwelling units. She's saying they're being used by rich towns that want to keep out poor families. Is she right?
No, I don't think so. We can do it all. We can, have some areas where the additional units are small. The comment about triplexes is correct. We ought to allow large units, but here our demographics, our housing stock in Connecticut is physically, functionally, and economically obsolescent. Physically, functionally, and economically obsolescent. The split-level ranches of the 60s don't make any sense anymore, but they make wonderful conversions into 2 1,000-square-foot apartments. And we have an aging population, like yours truly, and
me,
and you, okay, and and our household size is going down. People are leaving Connecticut, but we have more households being formed. How can that be? How can we need more units, more dwelling units, because we have more households?
Fewer kids.
When people leave, because the single-person household in another 20 years will be the dominant household type.
So maybe
state.
where you and she don't necessarily agree so much, but that you're saying the reality on the ground is there is a need to accommodate the singles.
Here's what happens. No, the families, what happens is that the older person, like myself, has an accessory dwelling unit or another smaller dwelling unit that's suitable for a single person, I'm single, and then turns over the house to the family.
Oh. So you're saying there is a way that, because we are concerned about families, right? You know, Church Street South,
and we should. We
something
can,
like 366 apartments. Those were 3 to 5 bedrooms, a lot of them, and that's not coming back under the way we do affordable housing.
the way you ease into this, people are afraid if you change the rules that it's going to be like a free fire zone. Everybody's going to have these trailers in the backyard. It's going to be a disaster. So what you do is you put your toe in the water by saying, and any local government can do it right now in Connecticut. We don't need the legislature to act to have local governments do this, like New Haven is apparently addressing. And that is, you say that we're going to allow 100 of these additional units in our municipality. We're going to try 100, see how it goes. So the first people that come in to apply for the 100 will get them. And out of those 100, so many of them are going to be small, and so many of them are going to have to be a minimum of 2 bedrooms or a minimum of 3 bedrooms.
And see how to work.
And so you say, have your planners tell you, we need more family affordable housing. All right, then we can do these additional dwelling units as of right on your lot, but you have to apply for one of the 3-bedroom units or one of the 2-bedroom units, and that's all you can construct. You can't build a small unit. And see if people apply, and then change that mix around. But start with your toe in the water by limiting the number of units. It could be 10 units, 50 units, or 100 units.
All right, so we've negotiated. Okay.
Yeah.
And we're doing that with Dwight Merriam, statewide expert on affordable housing and water here on Dateline New Haven. Got a few minutes left. You moved here in 75 to go to Yale Law School, and you stayed in town for a long time. How's the Yale Law School changed over the years? You know, in some ways we see it as this liberal bastion, which it really is. You know, it's very what people call PC, and on the other hand, it's been producing all these right-wing judges from the Federalist Society and the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, Samuel Alito. We also have Sonia Sotomayor.
Yeah,
but that's a lot in a 9-member board. What is that? What's happened to your alma mater?
Sotomayor, nothing that you hint at that's not good has happened. Everything good has happened. I will tell you.
We did have.
I was back in the law school for this year's reunion. I graduated. I had a late start because I had 7 years of active duty during Vietnam.
Oh, so you got to be an adult when you went to law school.
So, yeah, I was 29 when I went. So I was 32 when I graduated in 1978. 2 wonderful things have happened. One is that we have a far more diverse student population, students of color, people from the military. There were only 2 people from the military when I was there. I had just come back from Vietnam when I went there. And
what'd you do in Vietnam?
I drove a big ship. I did 3 tours in Vietnam in a big ship, in which our orders were don't get shot at. So I said, well, that's pretty good. I could go to the war zone under those conditions. And they came back, taught ROTC, and
how do you not get shot at?
You stay far enough offshore because they didn't. North Vietnamese didn't have any navy.
What did you come back thinking about your experience and about the war?
I stayed in. I stayed 31 years in the Navy as a warfare officer because I really became. Even as a lefty, liberal, progressive guy, I really came to believe so strongly that. On one of my websites is my Memorial Day speech about why we should all serve or get people in our families.
Like Charles Rangel says, it's a class thing. We want to be one society.
The only way you understood this, the military has to be run by civilians. The only way we get to run the military as civilians is know how it works, and the best way to know how it works is be in it. And my family came here before the Revolution. My family's home was part of the Minuteman National Park, and so I became a believer in the citizen soldier. I really.
How did you feel about the Vietnam War itself?
Oh, it was terrible. I didn't want to go. I did everything I could to get out of it. I was advised people how to get out of the draft.
And yet your experience made you a believer in serving. I
became a true believer in the idea of the citizen soldier, that we all ought to serve if we can for a little while, just so that we know what it's like inside. You'll never know what it's like inside unless you've been.
And then you read I don't know if you saw the great article a week ago by the guy who came from the Army, an older man who's going to Yale as an older student, and finding that all these people he thought were snowflakes. Actually have this great interaction.
The SEAL, former SEAL. Yeah, it's a great story.
So anyway, let me just tell you. Yeah. So more people of color now.
Oh, it's so diverse.
More women.
So so diverse. Well, they've always been good on gender, but they've really been diverse on race and ethnicity and all of the affinity groups and backgrounds for diversity and inclusion that we need to have. And the school also Heather Gerken, the dean, is astounding. And what she's done is open the doors in ways that no one else had to having the Yale Law students out in the community and experiencing what it means to serve others in forensic activities.
Because, Hillary Rodham was working at Legal Aid and working with children.
Oh, I know. We've always had that. Steve Weisner and that gang who are still around. Steve were there when I was there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And but no, Dean Gerken has done a fabulous job of experiential learning for Yale Law students. I'm coaching a couple of first-year Yale Law students.
And of course, their clinics do great stuff.
That's what I'm talking about. In part,
to immigration.
Yep. Yeah, so they're really out in the community in ways they haven't been before, and so I'm very proud. My daughter went there too. I'm proud to say.
How do you feel about the Federalist Society funneling all these right-wing judges that are dismantling the Constitution in the name of protecting the Constitution and enabling a right-wing takeover of our country and decimation of our institutions?
Is that a question or a political statement?
Question. How do you feel about that?
It's politics. The president's got the control over appointments. And he's done a job of filling up the courts of appeal with people on the right side of the continuum. But I'm hopeful for the court. I think we're going to see the Chief Justice here in the impeachment trial.
Watching. But everyone
we are watching, and he's not a Justice Kennedy, but he's been more of a swing than we expected.
Does he really believe in norms? Because we thought Mueller was going to stand up for norms. He didn't come through. They thought that moderate so-called Republican senators, they didn't come through. Everyone believes in Al Roberts. I think the question is, I was talking to my wife, is he pretending to be for the norms because that's a more effective way to complete his long-term goal of transferring power to get rid of the government, enforcing civil rights law and the Voting Rights Act, to roll it back more gradually with the respect for the other side? Or is he like the former tradition of justices who come to the Supreme Court and really do believe in an independent judiciary and that his protests against Trump maligning judges come from a sincere place?
Well, we certainly have seen justices change their stripes after they've been on the court for a while, and they rise to the occasion realizing how important they are to our constitutional government. And so we have no choice but to remain hopeful that the court's not going to turn.
And you're hopeful about the new students at Yale Law, the moved traditions, the more diversity. So you're not like Daniel Markovits, who is a professor right there at Yale Law School, who just published a book called The Meritocracy Trap, who said that, in fact, what we think we're doing by diversifying is actually at Yale preserving inequality and draining meanings from everyone's life by putting this more outwardly diverse group into a cookie-cutter mold of overwork and protecting finance once they graduate.
Oh, that's not true. I wouldn't go there in a minute. If you look at where Yale Law students end up when they graduate, sure, they go to the big law firms, many of them, but not in the numbers that other predominant law schools do. Not by a long shot. The Yale Law School has a much greater record in terms of placement of students in public service than any of the other well-known law schools. And so I'm proud to have gone there, and they're doing even a better job today.
All right. And I love this conversation. I could do this for hours.
Bring me back. I'll be happy to come and chat with you any day of the week, Paul.
2020 presidential race. Do you have a candidate?
Michael Bennett. Everybody says, what?
He's been sounding good, yeah.
Michael Bennett.
He's not.
Michael Bennett is somebody I know. He and his wife both went to Yale Law School too, and
he's been great. He was great in the debates when he was allowed in them.
I don't think he'll be there. The real question to me is who's going to be the president and vice president nominees. And there's a lot of fun tickets that you could put together.
There are a lot of people who think a woman of color is going to help with vice president. But am I wrong that whom you pick as vice president could hurt you if they're a disaster, like Tom Eagleton? But even Sarah Palin,
yeah.
But that in general, they don't really hurt or help you. It's really all about who the presidential candidate is.
I don't know. I think we have some old candidates, right?
We do.
And I think people are concerned about, are they too old? And this is a 73-year-old telling you.
I'm a 60-almost-year-old who says I'm too old. Yeah.
And so what would happen if you had an older president and a much younger vice president?
Then it really matters. So do you have anybody you like besides Bennett?
Sorry, we're just about out of time, Paul. It's been wonderful being here with you
Same
today.
here, Dwight.
I can't answer all the questions you have in the time.
But you answered so many, and I learned a lot. I really did. I admire and love the work you do.
Well, thank you.
And how you've developed such a base of knowledge about land use and about water and other issues, affordable housing, and you put them to good use.
I love what I do.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I love that you do it. Thanks for joining us today on WNHH FM's Dateline New Haven. Thanks for folks who sent in these great questions. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support. And thanks to the miracle man behind the controls, the master of cyberspace, WNHH station manager, Harry Droz. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.